but I do think that the biggest risk to human extinction, um, in cosmological time, we've only been around for 3 minutes, is a product of our capacity. We live in two worlds. We live in the real world like other organisms, but we also can escape into the world in which we are legends in our own mind, which I understand the human appetite for it. So if I were to give a prognosis, I would think our biggest risk is what I call a dissociation death spiral.
Hello, I'm John Brink, and we are podcasting on the Brink from downtown Prince George, British Columbia. And for all those people watching us from around the world, Prince George is in the province of British Columbia, Canada, west coast of Canada, a beautiful province. Lots of lumber, lots of trees here, beautiful day. It's a winter day. It's about -2. 3 weeks ago, it was about -45. It's all part of winter here in northern BC, and so it's a beautiful day. And we today have a very special guest, and his name is Jeremy Sherman, PhD. So, Dr. Jeremy, welcome to the show. And when I saw your intro, I said the first thing that I said to Scott, "Who is this asshole?" And so from this asshole to the other asshole, and before people get all excited and saying, "What is the matter with this guy introducing this amazing individual as an asshole?" It will become clearer as we go forward. And I know you appreciate the tongue-in-cheek a little bit here and about it. Jeremy, can I call you Jeremy?
Of course, yes. I'm not so much of an asshole that I need you to call me doctor.
Thanks, Jeremy. So, for all our guests, now we got them awake and they're sitting there on the edge of their chair and saying, "I wonder what's going to happen next." And so let's start with saying, where are you from originally? And you have an amazingly bio because you have a Master's of Public Policy from U.S. Berkeley, a PhD, in fact, a decision theory and comedy member of Harvard, Berkeley, and the University College of London.
Yes, no, I am not. I am not on the faculty of those universities. The professors who were on my PhD committee were.
Right.
Just to be clear, so this is further indication I'm not an asshole. I'm not going to be taking credit that I don't deserve. That would be wrong.
I had thought nothing less of you than that. So give us a bit of your background, Jeremy.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, so I grew up on the south side of Chicago, and my father was a successful businessman. He had founded with my grandfather Midas Mufflers, which was a large franchise company, and my father had also become something of an activist in his once the company was up and running. I was the third of four boys and had a little trouble figuring out what I was good for, in part because my older brothers were so successful at figuring out what they were good for, but partly because I was born broad. I had very broad interests. And it meant that as a result, I've taken many of the rides in life's amusement park. I didn't even attend classes for 3 years. I was at what they called a Summerhill school. I lived for 7 years on the world's largest hippie commune. I was an elected elder at 24 of that commune. After that, I founded a national lobbying organization with 75 chapters, an environmental lobbying organization. Worked as public affairs director for large green companies for a while. Got my master's in public policy, and around that time went through a midlife crisis that expanded me out of, you could say, the popular dogmas of the time about how to make social change, how to be in the world. I stopped being, you could say, spiritual, and got very interested in evolutionary science.
Are we talking the 70s now?
No, by then I'm 40 with a wife and 3 kids.
Right.
So I got very interested in evolutionary psychology, then interested in complexity theory, and then I met my research colleague and found my focus. And
Okay.
that's been and
So the
yeah.
question was, sorry, Jeremy, if I didn't explain. Are
No,
we
no,
in
that's okay.
1970 now in that area?
No, we're by now we're. I wanted to give a short summary because I have so
Yeah,
much
yeah,
content to deliver.
yeah,
By now I'm in my early 40s.
yeah.
So I'd already got my master's in public policy, and then I went back to school for this PhD in a cross between decision science and evolutionary biology, and
Okay.
lucked into the company of a Harvard Berkeley neuroscientist, biological anthropologist who had spent the past 20 years uh, ex- explaining the evolution of language in humans and how radically different it makes us from other organisms.
Right.
So he was on my PhD committee and then moved to Berkeley. He was at Harvard, a neuroscientist at Harvard, and then he moved to Berkeley, and we've been collaborating now for 28 years on a fundamental question that is often overlooked in the sciences. And from it, I have become incredibly broad while focused. I study everything, I call it cradle to grave, from the origins of life to our grave situation. That is uh, uh, my second to last book was with Columbia University Press. It's on origins of life research. It's called Neither Ghost Nor Machine: The Emergence and Nature of Selves. And my last book was called What's Up with Assholes: How to Spot and Stop Them with Becoming One. And to me,
Bingo. So
there's great
hence my
continuity in this work. Yeah,
hence my introduction, right?
exactly.
So you are an author and obviously have an amazing background, and and we will obviously explore this. How not to become a jerk or an asshole, So we use those terms fairly freely because I usually don't. Once in a while, I get pissed off about something. I mention that by exception, but this is something special dealing with you because a lot of that is about not only your studies, but it deals with people and in particular how we developed who we are, I believe, in terms of interacting with others.
Right. So I don't use the word loosely. I consider myself a psychoproctologist. I have come up with a light name for my research because it's a dangerous area to play. My original question was, what is a butthead? Since it can't just be whoever I happen to butt heads with. So I was looking for a much more precise definition of a tendency in human beings that goes by many names, some of them vulgar, like asshole or butthead, but some of them more clinical and neutral sounding, and yet still, I think, quite vague. Narcissist, gaslighter, dark triad personality, psychopath. These are diagnostic terms that are based on characteristics that anybody might perceive in someone else. I was looking for an explanation for how people get this way. What's up with them? And a lot of this was grounded. So when I met this guy Terrence Deacon, who was now at Berkeley, he had just shifted from explaining the evolution of language and how it makes us different to a fundamental question, which is uh, how does life emerge from chemistry? We've worked on that
Right.
question for 28 years. Um, that is, how does a struggle for existence, selves trying to stay alive, emerge within nothing but chemistry? And so my work goes all the way from that origin through to language, which I will argue makes us capable of being assholes. That
Right.
is, there are plenty of animals that are predators and parasites. One could argue that all of them are. We all depend on other organisms in that respect. But they can't be assholes. Assholes a human thing. And
Right.
and I was
Exclusive.
looking, yeah, and it's because of our capacity to imagine through language anything.
Yeah.
So I'll give at some point my explanation for what's actually really going on with people like that, and how. And so I think of my work in that arena, and I do a lot of strategic coaching for people who feel like they're dealing with an asshole or a narcissist. Um,
Right.
but so my work is on the diagnosis, treatment, and prevention of assholery.
Right. So then, that being said, you are you are obviously have written a number of books, and so did I. Actually, I'm working on my fourth one, and one of the challenges always is that finding the right title for the books. And so, as I went through the process of writing my first book, Against All Odds, so I became more involved in what do other people do. So as I would go through airports, which I do quite frequently, I go to a bookstore and I look around on titles, and there was a period, maybe still is to a certain extent, and every title of the top 20 books started with an F, and not to further add to it, F da 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 da, but F a title. So well, I obviously wouldn't want to use that, so I used Against All Odds, and the delicacy is that obviously, what are we writing about? In my case, the autobiography is it's an autobiography, and you better do it right the first time, because you cannot kind of throw away and say, okay, that was no good, so I'm going to do another one. I just want to give you some background on myself. I was born in Holland in November the 1st, 1940, so I am in my 84th year, and I was not academically very successful. I failed grade 3 and I failed grade 7 3 times, and then obviously, as you already know from my intro, is that born during the Second World War, Holland was invaded by the German armies in April of 1945. My dad was called into the Dutch army, and the last they heard from him was when he was caught in the bombing of Rotterdam. And then my mom, pregnant with me at the beginning of the war, and I had one sister 1 year older and a brother 2 years older, and things were pretty tough. I still remember from the time I was 3 years old and 4 years old that bombers overhead. That was when the Allied forces invaded or liberated Europe and stopped in or landed in Normandy in about June of 1944, pushed their way through the northern part of Holland. In the meantime, lots of bombers overhead, and I still remember, even now at that age, 300 or 400 bombers overhead, a sound that I will never forget, and even at that age. And my mom would take us outside, and not to watch the bombers, but the sound of it, and it felt safer outside than inside. And we could see in the distance, again, northeastern Holland was about 10 minutes from the border with Germany. We could see the cities burning in the distance, or the red skies of being bombed. Bremen, Kiel, Hamburg, and all those ones that touched on the North Sea and were factories that worked for the German army machine. And so we were liberated April the 12th, 1945, and I still remember that day by the Canadian Army, and I knew from that point forward that I would go to the land of my heroes, being Canada. The toughest time that we had was 1944-45.
I'm wondering, is this still an interview?
No, we are on the podcast.
Okay, so to tie that together, one of the things you're dealing with is a super duper asshole. Hitler was a super duper asshole.
Yes.
From my perspective, one of the biggest challenges we face as humans, I'm concerned about a bunch of issues that we face, but I do think that the problem of how to humbly humble people who will say or do anything to avoid human humility is the most fundamental, because we cannot begin to address our other problems so long as we enable people like Hitler, like Mussolini, to get into power. And this is true at all levels. This is true at the national, global level. It's also true within homes and workplaces and all of that. So that's why I focus on assholes.
The point that I'm making, Jeremy, is this one. In order to appreciate where we are in North America, and if you have survived war and you know the results of war but a lot of people don't realize that the war is over, and then from there on in everything goes back to normal, if you wish. Well, it simply doesn't. It can take generations before it ever, if families get back to a sense of normality. And what I see in North America, coming from Europe and during the war years, that I loved Canada because it's a beautiful country in North America. I have numerous businesses. I fly a lot through North America. And every time that I do, I sit at the window and I look outside, I say it's paradise. And then obviously we have democratic countries and they are flawed in different ways. But the alternative of a dictatorship that I experienced as being part of Hitler or looking around the world, I say to those people that aspire either in Canada or the United States in particular now, dictatorships, if that's what you want to pursue, then try try Russia, try North Korea, try Venezuela, or Cuba, or all those particular kind of countries, and then appreciate what you have. It is unique and it is special. So that's the point that I'm making, and the assholes that we are referring to there is the leaders of those particular countries, like Hitler, like I see Putin, who just got rid of somebody else of his potential opposition. Those kind of things.
Right. So my concern, you say try those places, and actually the United States, not Canada, but the United States right now is tempted to try those places. And so that's what I want to talk about. Bear with me a second, please.
Yeah,
Please
that's the point that I'm making.
Please bear with. No, I'm actually making an additional point that complements yours. So I want to just make
I like that.
point.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So my point is that the appetite in humans to engage in that kind of God playing, or to humble themselves before a demagogue and therefore be able to lord it over others, that appetite is what I pay attention to. I am what we would call a negoptimist. That is, I'm an optimist like a oncologist or criminologist. In order to make the world better, I am paying attention to what temptations in human beings would be drawn towards something like Nazism or like Trumpism in the United States. I do not pay much attention to the lifestyle brand. They seem all the same to me. Whether you're a Nazi or a communist, that seems more like ornamentation to me. What's going on for these people is that they're playing God as if they are eternally right, righteous, and mighty. And it draws a big crowd. And I want to make a case for why that would be so for human beings. With language, we have a capacity to imagine all sorts of possibilities. I think of us as trudging through a sandstorm of motivation eroding potential possibilities, all the real and imaginary threats and missed opportunities. We are an unusually anxious species. We can imagine our own deaths. We can think back to old horrors in ways that other organisms can't. And we can idealize. That is, through language, we can come up with imaginary idealizations and to see how far we fall short. And we can also soothe our anxiety by self-idealizing, which is what a Hitler or a Stalin would do. And it is very attractive to people. And I am very concerned these days that as the world becomes more challenging, there is a trend towards this kind of demagoguery around the world. You call it right wing, but I don't think it has anything to do with beliefs. I think it just has to do with this playing God, as if one has seen the light and is now the authority on what happens and is duty bound to straighten out anybody who disagrees with us. So that's why I'm focused on the asshole issue. I do appreciate the freedoms I've had in my life deeply. And So I have some friends and was like them in years past where I simply said, picture a better world. That's what I'd call positive optimism. I am like an oncologist to make for better health. I'm paying attention to cancer. Like a criminologist, in order to make society safer, I pay attention to what makes it unsafe. And that's why I have my focus on this question.
So that then being said, that if we look around the world and the potential for humans to, for whatever reason, if it is based on right wing, left wing, or in a lot of cases
Yeah.
religion, because if I
Yeah.
look around the world, most underlying foundation for all the grief that has happened has been
Yes.
mainly a religion. If I look in the United States, which is unique, talking about Trumpism, it is coming this close to a dictatorship, is that I don't think that people fully realize what will happen to them if they go to the next step, either did nearly or will, because if I still watch it on a daily basis, and contrary to what a lot of people think, that if we're sitting around the world, we're watching, in particular, the leadership of the world is the United States, or can be, and the direction it is going right now is extremely troubling to a lot of people in Europe that have been there before. And what the hell is the matter with these guys and the United States? That's my question, to
Yeah.
you, Jeremy. What is
Yeah.
going on with these people?
Right. So, and I ask that question not as a rhetorical one. That is, well, in my work, I turn those into real questions, and that's why I wrote "What's Up with Assholes." And
Right,
here's what I think is going on, and it does tie to what you said about religion.
right,
So, God is the ultimate idealization. He is right, righteous, mighty, and eternally consistent. So, if you ask a theologian if God can build a mountain so big he can't move it, they'll say he wouldn't because he's never a hypocrite. He never talks out. He's completely inconsistent. That would be the idealization that humans would have imagined. Because if you are eternally right, righteous, and mighty, you are completely free to do whatever you want, and you are completely safe. And you don't have to think of yourself as that. One doesn't need to think of themselves as that. One can defer to someone like that. That is, you humble yourself before the Lord, and as a result, you can lord it over everyone else. Now, the United States has a deeply religious history. And many people have thought that religion might make us more conscientious. But I would guess that from what you just said, I would guess that you agree
just the
with me
opposite.
that it does the opposite. Because
Yes.
it enables people to feel like they are perfectly free and safe. One way I think about this is that self-awareness is extremely challenging. What if you find out you have some fatal flaw? That would be very difficult. So what we might do is we might imagine that instead of having to monitor ourselves, we imagine an ideal being, a God, who monitors us. And we pretend that the God is really strict. But he's not really strict. He's only strict about one thing, which is loyalty to him. As long as you're loyal to him, then you can do whatever you want, and he'll forgive you, and you're destined for heaven where you are eternally safe and free. No more self-doubt, no more anxiety, no more of this human anxiety. So we have a country here that has been primed on that proudly, that is proud, blind faith that I am forgiven and bound for heaven. And then all you have to do is plug in a demagogue. So, I just read I've read several books on the evangelical, what they call Christofascism here. And what you've got in these people is they have turned from thinking of Jesus as the Prince of Peace to thinking of him as a militant. So that one book I read recently is Jesus and John Wayne. The way that they've combined the two, and they've found that in Donald Trump. So Donald Trump is not he doesn't have to be a good man any more than King David did. He's a soldier who's going to take back America for the good Christians. And this is something that was latent in America for a long time. It surfaced in times past. It has surfaced in spades now, and we are on the brink. That is I read the news vigilantly. I get
I
to
do
read it
too.
with a little less anxiety because I do study this stuff. That is, I have a use for it. I'm beyond hand wringing and fretting and outrage. I'm studying it. But I do think that's an issue for us, but not just for us. It's become a popular mode across the world. And I think we're in for what you could call a narcissism epidemic, because it turns out to be remarkably easy for humans to self rationalize. And it's a fabulous alternative to anxiety. And once you start self rationalizing, it's a slippery slope, and soon you're addicted. In the United States, there are now many people who, if they admitted that they were bullshitting, or if they admitted that Donald Trump was wrong, they would have to suffer an enormous surge of conscience about the things they've done. And most people simply don't have the stomach for that. They aren't courageous enough to admit they're wrong.
So they sooner go to dictatorship then and become like Russia, like Korea, like Venezuela, and you name it
Yeah.
and you name it, or you get a situation like if I look at the Middle East that we've been watching for a long time, without going into details. Let's look at the, at least in my simple mind that I've developed over the last 80 years, is saying that if I look at the Middle East, that will never be solved. Because why? Because it's religion. The Shiites control Iran. They have 1/3 of Iraq. They have about 1/3 of Syria and Lebanon. And then you have the Sunnis that are the rest. They will never resolve it. And then you got everybody else in between, and they be fighting. And that will never be resolved. What is on the foundation of it? Religion. Sunnis and Shiites are all praying to the same God, but some nephew got the role, God knows how long ago, and therefore
Right.
they're killing it. And it goes on and on and on, you know. So where do we go, Jeremy?
Well, I'm 67. I haven't given up yet on working on it, but I do think that the biggest risk to human extinction, um, in 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 cosmological time, we've only been around for 3 minutes, is a product of our capacity. We live in two worlds. We live in the real world like other organisms, but we also can escape into the world in which we are legends in our own mind, which I understand the human appetite for it. So if I were to give a prognosis, I would think our biggest risk is what I call a dissociation death spiral, which is that as life gets harder, we check out more into these idealizations. You listed some of the religious ones, and I have taught some religious history, but I do not, the particulars don't matter. The same is true for you. You're interested in why people would do this. And I'm saying that it's easier to play God or God's servant than to be human and deal with all the doubts and anxieties that come with us. And as a result, what would happen is that we will check out more into our self-idealizations, thereby neglecting reality more, which thereby would get worse, which would thereby make us check out more. And there is a lot of history of this. I mean, the Weimar Republic and then what followed from it is a good example. In crisis, life gets complex and overwhelming, and the overwhelmed tend to gravitate strongly to simpletons, people who will make the world sound simpler than it really is. And that's my gravest concern. And that's, yeah, and I work against it, but I recognize how strong that undertow is, that drag into self-idealization. It's a major problem for humans.
Now, talking about religion, I'm agnostic, so I'm not particular in any direction. I have difficulty in explaining what is up there. I hear from time, I grew up in Holland. The northern
Yeah,
part of Holland is primarily Protestant. The southern part is Catholic.
yeah,
And what I hear in other areas in saying, okay, we should pray at school to a God, and some of the demanding Christian communities demand that, and saying, my question is, which God? Which one? You know, yours or the other guys, or whose God? If anybody, you know. So it It plays a major role in some of the established countries like Holland. The reason that the southern part of Holland is Catholic and the northern part is Christian, because it was so affected by history, and they couldn't get across the rivers. So the influence of the Europeans, in particular Germany and those places, became in northern Holland, in the southern part more France, Spain, and Morocco, and all the other countries that invaded it. So that's how it, and there is a dislike or the concern between the different groups. The southern ones and the
Yes.
northern ones are afraid that the south is going to take over, and the Catholic, blah blah blah, and on and on and on. You know. So,
Right. So
but
Holland has Holland had the colony Indonesia, and Indonesia is really interesting when it comes to religion and this question, which God. Um, it's a collection of 17,000 islands, and it is intensely religious. Um,
correct.
your religion shows up on your driver's license. I was there for a month with my daughter a little while ago, and uh, we didn't meet a single atheist or agnostic there. So I ended up asking a question that turned out to be the right question. I asked people, lots of them, like 30, 40 people, who made religion, God or man? And everybody answered that there's only one God and humans make up different religions to pray to them. And only after returning from Indonesia did I find out that in the charter for Indonesia's independence, that was the first principle. There is only one God, and people make up different ways to pray to him. Now, I was there, this is just 5 years ago, but right now, the country is going through the same, it's being swallowed up. It's the largest population of Muslims in the world, and the militant Muslims seem to be making inroads. That is, the fragile harmony between these radically different religions seems to be breaking down. And this is an issue around the world. You talk about the different competing religions. I think about cults and counter cults. For example, communism was a cult, and there was a reaction to, or you could say Catholicism was, you could say, became a cult, and Protestantism easily became a counter cult. Capitalism became cultish under the communism was a cult. Um, and you could say that the libertarian Ayn Rand approach is the counter cult. Same behaviors, different lifestyle brand. So that's my perspective on it, is that you'll tend to get a narcissistic epidemic or a cult epidemic, but it can be cults against each other because each cult actually is fueled by their opposition to the other cult.
So the speculation now is like the liberal or the Republican Party in the United States is a cult.
Yes, and to some extent, it is a reaction to a cult that would be closer to my lifestyle brand. I live in Berkeley. That is, there were always cultish elements to our movement as well. We were the ones who said you could be perfectly safe and free, do your thing, and we're all one, and never really dealt with that. We just felt very pure. So it's very easy for the right wing to fuel itself on what left wing cultishness there was, and for the left to fuel on the right wing's cultishness. It becomes an amplifying feedback loop between the two. And neither of them would want to admit that they are using the same techniques as the other. Like I say, same strut of absolute righteous mightiness, different lifestyle brands, and the
Right.
lifestyle brands don't matter. They're ornamentation. That's not the point. The point is to feel perfectly safe and free, and people can do this with these ideologies.
And then pushing it to the point of being so set in that particular model that
Yes.
it becomes a dictatorship with all the consequences resulting from that.
Right. And so the United States is currently rewaging all of its major wars. It's rewaging its war against monarchy, against racism, against segregation, against fascism, against totalitarian dictatorship like Stalin had. Why? You probably know this from everyday life. It's about how do you get over a lost cause. If you're married and your marriage ends, you kind of have to face it. Now, you may have a lot of trouble getting over it, and you may think that you'll be able to remarry, but you're confronted by that. Likewise, if your business fails, if a business fails, there it is in your face. But what about these abstract causes? What about if you you were a Confederate who demanded slavery, and the war ends? Well, there you don't quite have to admit it, and this is where Jesus is actually interesting. Jesus lost. He lost badly. He failed in his movement. But Jesus is also, and we see him as a martyr, but he's a martyr to a movement. The Christians would say he's a martyr to a movement that will ultimately prevail. So this would be the ultimate comfort. On the one hand, you get to play victim of persecution. You know, their religious symbol is a torture instrument, the cross. But you also get to pretend that you are King of Kings, because in the final battle, you will prevail. So the South will rise again is a popular slogan among the Confederates. That is, we did lose, but it was a minor battle in the Great War, which we will win in the end. And so that's why, you said this earlier, many people in Europe recognize the horrors of the fascism that they experienced and the communism that they experienced. But it's also, many other people feel as though they don't have to give up their pride and their authority and their nationalism and all of that. And so they are a growing danger, because it turns out that when you beat people like this, they don't just say, "Oh, I was wrong." No, they don't. They say the South will rise again.
The challenge, Jeremy, is that if you live in Europe, and obviously I was born there, and I felt the results of war and dictatorships, Hitler, and seeing people leave in our town, Jews mainly that never came back and died in Buchwald or wherever, you know, and now we see Putin pressing on Europe, trying to defeat. And now what a lot of people don't realize, at least not in my mind, being very frank about it, is the people that are shedding their blood and everything that they have are the Ukrainians, to protect what we believe is the free world, led by the United States. And at the same time, the United States is leaving, for all intents and purposes, organizations that have served it well, like NATO, and saying, torpedoing the whole concept that was there. And people that, from my generation, and I went through this, I lived it, so it's all recent, and saying, well, we don't want that, because we got this cult taking over, do not appreciate or understand what it really means to have a dictatorship. Like in Venezuela, you load them in the plane, you put them out in the middle of the ocean, right? Get rid of them. And so that is the next step. Look what happened in Russia. The fellow, I forget his name now offhand, but that wasn't, that he had locked up in Siberia. He died just today, or got murdered just today.
Yeah. Right.
That's what is happening today, the way I see it. So the pressure is coming from Russia. We are not supporting collectively the Ukrainians who are shedding their blood. It's amazing what they have done. If the Putin will press, it will go into Europe, it will go into Poland, and on and on and on. And while the Americans, with all due respect, I love them and all the other things, right?
Yeah. So here's an illustration of that point. So the right wing in the United States was the most fundamentally anti-Russian and the most anti-Soviet Union, but anti-Russian dictatorship, you could say, and also the most interventionist of us all. They were the ones who said we should stay in Vietnam to fight against the communists. Now, Putin changes the lifestyle brand. He no longer calls himself a communist. But he's doing exactly what Stalin would do, and he's doing it in Stalin's name. And so you get to see from this that the Republicans never really believed any of the things they claimed to believe so much that it trumped all other considerations. They're willing to change their mind. Why? Because all they're after is the sense that they are eternally right, righteous, and mighty. One more connection. One way that we describe what Putin is that he's a Sado-fascist. Russia doesn't have that many resources or that much access to global ports. So rather than elevating itself, it has been on a campaign to undermine Europe. So I coined the term Sado-narcissism based on Sado-fascism. That is, there's two ways to pretend that you're God. One is to elevate yourself, and the other is to treat others like the devil. Both work, and both work hand in hand. So a narcissist or a fascist will tend to want to put others down as a way of self-elevation. That's just built right into it. And so that's what he seems to be doing in Europe with great success. And why? Because of what you mentioned. It doesn't take that long to forget the horrors of war. There are so many movies about World War II, and yet, or about gangsters and murderers and all of these people who can do whatever they want. They're perfectly free and perfectly safe. The anti-heroes, and yet they have an attraction to us. They are attractive to us because we'd kind of like to have their power. And so you can have these movies in which the Nazis look bad. So an example of this is when ISIS watches American movies, they identify with the white hat hero. That is, they're not even, all they know is they want to feel like they're good. And they do. Most people who are assholes think that they're good people. Which brings us full circle. When you called me an asshole up front and said that you were one too, I had a delight in that because I know I sometimes get asked by people, am I an asshole? And I say, if you wonder about that, you're probably not. Yeah. That is, the people who are assholes are either really proud of being one because they suddenly turn the word into a hero term.
I don't even know it.
or they or you say you don't know any assholes. Do you know any assholes?
I do. Yeah. But not many.
I had a partner, a girlfriend for a while from your part of the world, from British Columbia. And she didn't understand what I was doing in my work. This was 15 years ago because she had never met an asshole. Yeah. And I thought, well, yeah, Canadian.
Yeah.
and yet you guys produced that wonderful series Trailer Park Boys, which is a magnificent study of assholes.
Yeah.
That is, those guys will say anything to feel right, righteous, and mighty, safe and free. That's what they do. They're just like, I call them Trump bots, and they're not named after Donald Trump, though he is one. Trump means two things. It means fake and it means beats everything. Exactly. I think this is what an asshole gives themselves, which is a wild card. You can say anything, and a trump card. That you can do anything, and whatever you do is unbeatable. Yeah. And so that's why I think the biggest challenge facing humankind is how to humbly humble these people who will say or do anything to avoid human humility. It's a major problem.
So, Jeremy, that then all being said, and we covered a lot of ground here, is that what can we do individually is that I hope, and lived an interesting life in my nearly 84 years where I saw the world and all the things that are around it that I gave you at the introduction, and then now live in what I call paradise, because every time I fly in a plane across North America, it is paradise. It's beautiful and all the other kind of things. And then at the same time, I obviously stay in touch with the news, CNN. I watch CNN, and I have to know what's going on in the States because I do a lot of business there. But at the same time, I get so frustrated about all the things that we talked about. What can we do individually? My question is, Jeremy, is saying that at the end of the day, it's not about making a lot of money. That to me is not secondary. I like to write books. I like to give presentations. I like to interact with young people. I like to be active in, and giving back to the community, and then kind of feeling, be proud of my children, be proud of the things that I do. And then at the end of the day, just before I close my eyes for the last time, and kind of feel like saying, I've been okay. You know, it wasn't perfect, but by and large, the things that I've done are okay. And so that to me would be, for me individually, success.
Yes, I understand it. Let me come back to your question. What can we do individually?
Correct.
I said that it's easier to play God than be human if you can get away with it. As a neg optimist, I say crime pays really well if you can get away with it. So I think it's very important for us as citizens, it's our civic duty, no matter where we live, to make it cost something to play God. And so that's why this question, how do you humbly humble such people? And so they show up at any level. They can show up in a family, they can show up at work, they can show up in our personal life. And I don't mean to humiliate them, but how do you make it so it costs them to play God so that they realize that there's real disadvantages to it? And so that's one thing I want to address. And the other is, how do you prevent yourself from becoming like that? And to that, I'll just say briefly, play God in fiction. Exercise that appetite, that natural human appetite to play God, by identifying with heroes and people in fiction, and then remembering that when you turn it off, when the fiction's over, you get back to reality. So I've been to major anthem rock concerts. I've been to Trump rallies. The only difference is that the Trump rallies, they think that they've seen something more real than reality. When they go to the anthem rock concerts, they go home and get back to reality. That's the prevention side. How do you respond to someone who is playing God? And I have several techniques that I don't think are being used much at all, but I think they need to be. And like I said, I offer coaching services for anybody who feels like they're dealing with a narcissist or an asshole or someone who is otherwise a bully, oppressive, and all that. But here's one way I think of it is, don't debate them. They're just masturbating to you taking the bait. Call them on that instead. That is, you point out over and over, look at this. See what he did just there? He did it again. He will say or do anything to avoid admitting that he's human. And their response will invariably be, because they're Trump bots, they're robotically playing trumped up Trump cards. They will robotically respond with something that has the same message. And so you do it over and over. You say, see what I did there? See what he did there? See what he did there? And that does expose the what's really going on with them. One more technique that I suggest, there are a lot of terms in our language that they're loaded. They sound positive or negative. When in fact, as you would know, as a businessman, as a practical businessman, they're actually mixed. So an example would be the term care. That is, it sounds good to be caring. It sounds bad to be uncaring. In fact, we can't care about everything. Our attentions are limited. We can't fuss over everything. We have limited fuss budget. And so as a result, when someone, especially a bully, accuses me of being uncaring, I say, don't mistake me for someone who's trying to be caring. I'm trying to care about the right things, not the wrong thing. And this applies with all of those shaming and positive terms. That is, life, the real life for real humans who are facing reality, is trying to avoid opposite errors, trying to avoid being too assertive or not assertive enough for a situation. I think of it like riding a winding road, and you will, in the dark. So you got to watch out on both sides. And these people who will moralize at us are like backseat drivers, each looking out opposite windows saying, this is the only side you have to worry about. And so I find great strength in recognizing that these loaded terms that people rely on are actually mixed bags. And so, once again, things like, perhaps you mistake me for someone trying to be caring. I'm not trying to be caring. I'm trying to care about the right things, not the wrong thing. I find that a very useful technique for deflecting the moralizing that we get from people who are playing God.
I agree with that. So for me, what is important is that if I look in the morning in the mirror, then I'm saying I'm okay. I say to a lot of young people that I interact with about that are struggling to saying, what should I do? Where should I go? And I say, come to peace with who you are, and that you are unique in the world. You are only one copy of one individual. Come to peace. And then the other part that I say is, at least in my views, is credibility is indefensible. And your friends will know, your enemies you never can convince. So I'm not wasting my time to deal with people that want to be negative. Go that way, stay away from me. I believe in the positive. And so, but still try to be aware, as you already can notice, is that I pay attention, at least with the best of ability that I've been able to get, is looking at the world and trying to figure out what are the dynamics and where can I fit in, or what difference can I make.
Wonderful. One last comment, because I love to turn answers into springboards for next questions.
Yeah.
So I coined a term last week, eschatophobia. Eschatology is fear of last judgment. And what I noticed is, though I am an atheist, I'm not an agnostic, I'm an atheist. I work on the origins of meaning and purpose and mattering from chemistry. But even though I'm like that, I do concern myself some with whether I'm living well. And I think that is the right questions for humans. And because that's what an active conscience is. Now,
Right.
what I notice is that with language, we can come up with a way to permanently reassure our consciences. So there are people I know who I think can reliably say with confidence that they are okay, that they're good people. Many of them would say that they're great people. Okay is better. That is, as you described it, is better. Because it means you're still learning and you're still trying to improve.
And
but
always listening, right?
Yeah, that's right. And so one more technique, very briefly. Anytime we have a principle like say no to negativity, I notice whether it's hypocritical. That is, whether it contradicts itself. Here's another one. Be intolerant of intolerance. Commit yourself to flexibility. You shouldn't be judgmental. Now, when I see those contradictions, like negativity is a no-no, which means that it's also negative, I notice that it's a dilemma. It's one of those winding road kind of things. That is, I want to be negative about the right things and not the wrong things. Remember, I said I'm a neg optimist. Right. I'm paying attention to what doesn't work.
Right.
I do have concern about people who can block anything that they don't like by calling it negative. It's a kind of fake objectivity. It's like saying, I don't like it, and therefore it's negative, and therefore it is universally barred. That would be a problem. I'm trying to keep open to the right stuff and not to the wrong stuff. And this is another thing we should do with people who are narcissists. That is, take your moral counsel from decent people. You don't have to take it from everybody. You don't have to take it from a narcissist. When a narcissist is scolding you, they're doing it for their purposes. Keep your own counsel, as you have obviously demonstrated, and and your own counsel on who to take counsel from.
Yeah.
So those are just some ideas about it.
I think it is amazing, Jeremy, and an amazing discussion between us. Is that the other thing that I find interesting in a general sense is that when I grew up, it's. People got together and they sit together at the restaurant, they go for dinner together and they socialized, and the same here to a certain extent. Then obviously COVID came, that didn't improve that much. And then we see less and less of that where people interact. Now, the beauty of it all is that about 2, 3 years ago already, I got involved in blogging and trying to interact more. And then obviously we started to develop the form of podcasting, which is relatively new, because
Yeah.
what it all of a sudden does, Jeremy, and that's why it is so interesting. And you know, we will get so there you and me are sitting here interacting on topics that, you know, you have an amazing background, you know, and obviously challenging in terms of, you know, the book about assholes, and will draw attention. But there, you and me are sitting here having this discussion for the last hour, nearly. And in the meantime, what I love about this is we podcasting around the world. I
Yeah.
podcasted with somebody in Peru. Last week. Somebody in Spain. Somebody in you know, in China, and all over the place. And I
Yeah. I
believe
love that. Yeah.
it's still in its infancy, because it's not just you and me that are sitting here. I already know tens of thousands of people. I'm not bragging about how many viewers we have and all that kind of stuff. That's not the point. The point is that we have at least tens of thousands of people are listening to us and become part of the conversation. And I think that is amazing. And it started out, now we have virtual, and it feels to me like you and me are sitting in the same room. It feels
Yes.
to me
I
that
love
way.
that.
We
Yeah.
have developed a relationship between you and myself, and talking
Yes.
at some very challenging and delicate topics that a lot of people we get their attention by the opening. And I thought, what should I say? Because I read your bio and very impressive, obviously, and I'm not trying to make you feel good, but you know, but then at the same time, I thought I should include in there, I wonder what kind of an asshole he is, even before they even know about it. And then they probably said, what the hell is he doing here? You know?
It works. It's fine. There's actually an invulnerability that's deep for me, which is irony. My sense of the greatest intimacy between human beings is the capacity to laugh at and with each other, at
I
the
agree.
human condition.
I
And
agree.
so I love that you introduced me that way. That's a great way to introduce me.
And don't
Oh,
take
no, so
yourself,
actually,
as people in general, I say, have a sense of humor about it. Do be serious, but at the same time, preserve that sense of humor. You know,
that's what
so
yeah. When I went to work for the Body Shop International in its heyday, I was invited to the Scottish castle where these two founders were, and one of them was so these are the Scottish. One of them is a Scottish street thug who married the woman who founded the Body Shop, a street thug with a stutter, but he
my
was deaf. He was towering and commanding and charismatic and
yeah,
worth millions and millions. And so
yeah.
I go and meet him for the first time. He knows that I'm coming and going to be running their public affairs. His first words to me are, "Jeremy, you fucking asshole." And it loosened everything up. It was so
Open the
disarming
door.
and opened the door. It was great.
Yeah.
So
Jeremy, before we go, can you share with us your website and the books? You've written about 4 different books. Can you show us where they are, or have you got some laying around?
yes, yeah. So what I think is best is I can send you links to them all. So
Okay.
yes, there's way too much of me if you want online. So if one just looks up my name, you'll find lots.
Okay. I
I've
just
written
want to
over
make
1,000.
sure that how can
Yeah,
they stay and get in touch with you?
yeah. So the easiest way is my initials at my name, js@jeremysherman.com. That's how
Okay.
to get in touch with me. But when you put out the podcast, I hope you have the links there. It will be very useful for me. I've got 3 websites. I've got over 1,000 articles I've written for Psychology Today. I've got my 3 books. I've got 2 consulting websites. One is on this work on the narcissism. That's called psychoproctology.org. The other one is called adaptivestrategies.net. That's where I invite people to have conversations with their future selves. I'm saying that there's a lot of talk about in psychotherapy. There's a lot of work on uncovering your past. there's a lot of talk about being in the present. I think what's useful for people is to get over the awkward discomfort of talking to their future selves and just learning to have a good negotiation with them. I wrote a book called Negotiate with Yourself and Win. And so that's another, it's basically life coaching or strategic coaching about how to build towards a better future by getting to know yourself. And so for that, I listen really attentive to people and then feed back to them what I hear they want in their future and their ambivalences about their future, about which directions they want. We sort that stuff out. Doubt management and coming into focus. So that's the work I do.
I love it, Jeremy. And now our podcast, we put them out the following morning, save and except on Fridays, we put it out on Monday mornings, but they are virtually unedited. With all the podcasts that I do, I put them out the way they came. I have to just tell you this because then at one time, the only time that I was going to make an adjustment and then decided not to is I introduced my guest. And all of a sudden, the whole building here started shaking. We had a 4.6 earthquake, and I said, "What the?" I didn't say the F word, so what? But I said, something. What the hell happened? We left that part in too. So that for me is very, very important. So that's what we do. Very quickly, we put it out.
Good. So I'll make sure you have my links before you put it out.
Let's stay in touch, Jeremy.
I would love that. I would love that.
Okay.
Please, let's do that.
It was a privilege and an absolute amazing podcast, and I really appreciate you being my guest.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to be with you.
You take care.
You take care.